All right, so before we dive into the physics, and we are going to get into the actual physics, I promise, let me give you a quick mental anchor for where this conversation is going. Most people hear simulation hypothesis, and they immediately picture Neo dodging bullets, or maybe some tech billionaire rambling at a party. And look, Elon Musk did say on stage that he thinks there's only a 1 in billions chance we're living in base reality. But here's the thing. That's actually one of the less interesting versions of this argument. The version that physicists are wrestling with? That's rooted in something much more concrete. It's rooted in the structure of reality itself. The way the laws of physics are written. The way information behaves at the smallest scales. And when you start pulling on those threads, things get genuinely strange. So let's start at the beginning. One of the first things that points physicists towards simulation-adjacent thinking is something called the Planck length. Now, the Planck length, roughly 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters, is the absolute smallest meaningful unit of space. Below that scale, our current laws of physics completely break down. Space itself doesn't make sense anymore. Here's why that's weird. In a continuous, fully real physical universe, you'd expect you could keep zooming in forever. There'd be no floor, no minimum pixel size. But what we find instead is this hard lower limit, almost like the universe has a resolution, a minimum rendering distance. Now, physicists will be the first to tell you that this doesn't prove anything. But here's the part that gets interesting. That's not the only place where we see this kind of digital structure sneaking in. Think about this. What if the fact that reality has a minimum size isn't a quirk of physics, but a feature of how the program is written? Because the Planck length isn't alone. When we look at quantum mechanics, which is, by the way, the most precisely tested theory in the history of science, we see something equally strange happening with energy. Energy doesn't flow continuously. It comes in discrete chunks called quanta. That's literally where the word quantum comes from. The universe, at its deepest level, ticks. It doesn't slide smoothly from state to state. It jumps. Discrete steps. Almost like frames per second. And I want to be careful here because I'm not saying the universe is literally a video game. What I'm saying is that the architecture of physics, minimum sizes, discrete energy packets, quantized states, looks a lot more like compiled code than it looks like an infinitely smooth analog reality. Okay, this next part is where it gets really wild. And this isn't fringe stuff, this is mainstream theoretical physics. In the 1990s, physicist Jacob Bekenstein and later Stephen Hawking were studying black holes, and they discovered something deeply unsettling about the nature of information. They found that the maximum amount of information that can be stored in any region of space is proportional not to the volume of that region, but to the surface area surrounding it. Read that again. The information content of a three-dimensional space is encoded on its two-dimensional boundary. This became known as the holographic principle, and it was later formalized by physicist Juan Maldacena in one of the most cited papers in the history of physics. The idea is that our three-dimensional reality might be, and this is the actual scientific term, a holographic projection from a lower dimensional surface. Now, this doesn't mean the world is fake in some cheap sense. The coffee in your cup is still hot. Your stubbed toe still hurts. But what it does suggest is that the three-dimensional experience we have might be a kind of emergent interface, a rendered output of something happening at a more fundamental level. Here's the part that stops physicists cold. Maldacena's framework, called ADS-CFT correspondence, actually works. It's been used to solve real physics problems. That means this holographic idea isn't just philosophy, it has predictive power. And when you combine the holographic principle with the discrete structure of quantum mechanics, you start to get a picture of reality that looks less like a physical stage and more like a computational process. Now we have to talk about the philosophical side, because this is where the argument gets its sharpest teeth, and it comes from philosopher and Oxford professor Nick Bostrom. In 2003, Bostrom published a paper laying out what he called the trilemma of the simulation argument. He said, one of three things must be true. 1. almost all civilizations go extinct before they reach the technological capability to run realistic simulations of consciousness. 2. Almost all civilizations that reach that capability have no interest in running such simulations. Or 3. We are almost certainly living in a simulation right now. That's it. One of those 3 has to be true. And here's why physicists find this uncomfortable rather than dismissible. If we assume that a sufficiently advanced civilization could run simulations, and given what we know about computing trajectories, that seems plausible. And if they ran even one such simulation, the number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber real ones. The statistics alone start pointing in an uncomfortable direction. And I know what you might be thinking. Okay, but this is still just philosophy, not physics. Fair. So let's go back to physics. Here's where it gets personal for physicists. Because quantum mechanics doesn't just look weird from the outside. It's weird in a way that has very specific implications. Take the double-slit experiment. You fire particles at a barrier with 2 slits. When you don't observe which slit the particle goes through, it creates an interference pattern. It behaves like a wave, spreading through both slits simultaneously. The moment you measure which slit it used, the moment you observe it, the interference pattern disappears. It collapses into one definite path. The act of observation changes the outcome. Not the act of interfering with the particle physically, just the act of gaining information about it. Physicist John Wheeler spent decades wrestling with this, and he came to a conclusion he called the participatory universe. The idea that information isn't just a description of reality. Information is reality at some fundamental level. He famously summarized it as, "it from bit," and that phrase, "it from bit," is now a serious research direction in theoretical physics. The idea that physical existence emerges from yes or no informational choices. Binary states. Sound familiar? More recently, physicist Paola Zizi proposed that the early universe could be modeled as a quantum computer, performing computations that gave rise to the space-time we inhabit. This isn't a metaphor she's using, it's a mathematical framework. So here's the question you have to sit with. If reality is fundamentally informational, and information can be computed, then what exactly is the difference between a simulated reality and a real one? Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't give you the other side, because there are serious physicists who find the simulation hypothesis unscientific, and their criticisms matter. The biggest one is falsifiability. For a hypothesis to be scientific, it needs to make predictions we can test. And so far, the simulation hypothesis doesn't have a clean experimental prediction attached to it. As physicist Sabine Hossenfelder has argued, if the simulation is perfectly consistent with the laws of physics we already have, there's no test that could reveal it. It becomes unfalsifiable, which by scientific standards means it's not a scientific theory, it's a philosophical position. Physicist Max Tegmark, who actually does believe in something close to the simulation idea through his mathematical universe hypothesis, still agrees that you have to be careful about the difference between the math of physics looks computational and we are literally in someone's computer. That's a huge gap, and it's honest to acknowledge it. But here's what's interesting, and this is where I think the real value of this conversation lies. Even the skeptics aren't dismissing the deeper question. They're just being precise about what we can and can't claim scientifically. The question of why physics looks the way it does, discrete, informational, holographic, that question remains genuinely open. And some of the best minds in science are actively working on it. So let's bring this home, because I think there's a version of this conversation that leaves you feeling nihilistic, like nothing is real, so why bother? And I want to push back on that hard. Even if we are in a simulation, and again, we don't know that, but even if, the experiences you're having are real to you. The love, the pain, the curiosity you're feeling right now listening to this. That's not diminished by the substrate it runs on. In fact, some philosophers argue that if anything, the simulation hypothesis makes meaning more personal and more interesting. because it shifts the question from what is the universe made of to what is this experience for? Wheeler's participatory universe idea suggests that observers aren't just passive passengers in reality. They're co-creators of it. Every measurement, every interaction, every act of consciousness might be part of how reality resolves itself from probability into fact. That's not scary. That's extraordinary. Remember at the start I said that peer-reviewed physics is pointing in an unsettling direction? Here's the reframe. It's only unsettling if you were attached to one specific model of what real means. Open that up even a little, and it becomes one of the most fascinating puzzles in the history of human thought. So where does physics actually land on the simulation hypothesis? Here's the honest summary. Physics does not confirm we're in a simulation, but it does reveal a universe that is fundamentally discrete, informational, observer-dependent, and holographic in structure. And those properties are genuinely difficult to explain if you insist on a purely classical, continuous, analog reality. The Planck length gives us a resolution limit. Quantum mechanics gives us a universe that behaves differently when observed. The holographic principle tells us our 3D experience may be a projection of 2D information. And the mathematical success of frameworks like ADS-CFT shows these aren't just metaphors. They have real predictive power. Does that prove simulation? No. Does it make the question worth taking seriously? Absolutely yes. And that's the takeaway. The simulation hypothesis, stripped of its sci-fi clothing, is pointing at something real and unresolved at the foundation of physics: the relationship between information, observation, and physical existence. We don't have the answer yet, but the fact that we're asking the question with this level of mathematical rigor, that might be the most exciting thing happening in science right now. If this kind of deep dive into the actual science behind big ideas is your thing, subscribe, because this is exactly what we do here. Every week, we take the most interesting questions at the edges of human knowledge and break them down without dumbing them down. Hit the bell if you want to be notified, and if you've got a question or a topic you want us to dig into, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.